Welcome to today's lunch talk given by me, I'm Kai, and I wanted to take this opportunity to promote some recent work that's been published. So I want to talk about making planets and planet formation in turbulent protoplanetary disks. So let's just get straight to it. So I'm sure everyone in this room, or in the world actually, agrees that planets form in protoplanetary disks. Right? This is an array of directly observed protoplanetary disks, and you can see a variety of substructures, right? You can rings and gaps, sometimes see spirals in them, and these are often taken as evidence or clues to planets being formed in these systems. So we are confident that planets form in protoplanetary disks. Now we just have to figure out the details of planet formation. Now, in modern planet formation theory, so-called core accretion theory, we start from micron-sized dust grains and then slowly build our way up to 1,000 kilometers in size with the Earth. And this is a huge problem, many orders of magnitude. So there are many obstacles throughout this story. Now this is a very simplified illustration of what we think planet formation involves. So we start from a young disk, protoplanetary disk, with dust and gas well mixed. And after a while, the dust particles, the brown dots, will settle towards the disk midplane, and we will form a very dense particle layer. And in this particle layer, the dust grains will grow. Well, that's the idea anyway. They'll grow from micron-sized dust up to about millimeters or centimeters through collision and sticking. And then, through some process which we have not yet understood, they grow to what we call planetesimals. So these are kilometer-sized or larger bodies which can then attract one another through mutual gravity. So they proceed, and then they can coagulate by gravitational forces, and then coagulate into a protoplanet. So this is my best effort to summarize planet formation on one slide. Now, of course, there's many details to this picture. For example, the very first step of dust settling is not so straightforward, actually. So what I'm going to play to you is a numerical simulation of the process of dust settling. So we initialize a protoplanetary disk with uniform dust-to-gas ratio, and then we just let the system evolve. Right? This is looking at the disk from side on. And the color is the dust-to-gas ratio on a logarithmic scale. Now the video is a little bit fast, so I'll play it twice, but what I want you to notice is that the dust will try to settle initially, but then something interesting happens. So it settles, but then you see it gets stirred back up again, and then for the rest of the simulation, the particles remain pretty well mixed through this column. So let me play it again. Tries to settle, but then gets stirred or puffed up by some kind of activity, which is turbulence. So in this particular simulation, there is an underlying turbulence in the system called the hydrodynamic turbulence that results from an instability called the vertical shear instability. So in this example, the dust particles do not settle to the midplane, so there is no hope of planet formation. And so last year, I looked at this problem thinking, well, what can I do to fix it, right? How can I make dust particles settle to the midplane even though there's turbulence? So one of the interesting results I found is that so the simulation I showed you was for a dust-to-gas mass ratio of 1%. So in that case, the particles don't settle. But I found that if I increase the dust-to-gas ratio to 10%, which is an exaggeration for illustration, but if I do that, then the particles can then settle towards the midplane without problem, reaching very high dust-to-gas ratios. So we do expect planet formation in this case. So increasing the solid abundance in a protoplanetary disk can help particles to settle, which helps planet formation. Otherwise, particles don't settle, and then there's no planetesimals, and therefore there's no planets. So this is just one way to overcome the particle stirring by turbulence. Now this was a numerical simulation done last year with the Pluto code. It's a publicly available hydro code you can download. I made some approximations in the code in order to do the simulation, but I recently checked that approximation by doing the same simulation with a different code called Fargo 3D. Now, this has a improved treatment for modeling dust. But I get similar results. So this is a dust-to-gas ratio of 1%, and this is a 5%. As you can see, again, if I increase the dust-to-gas ratio, I can make the dust particles settle, even though the system is actually turbulent. And this is actually quite reassuring because Fargo and Pluto are quite different codes with different approximations and different algorithms. But I get similar results, so I'm confident in this result that it's physical. That if you increase the solid abundance in a protoplanetary disk, then you can have easier dust settle. So now the dust has settled to the midplane, and I want to think about planet formation or planetesimal formation in this midplane here. Now, one of the most common ideas for planetesimal formation is something called the streaming instability. So this is now looking at the midplane, just focusing on the midplane of the disk. And what I've done here is I've initialized my simulation with an almost uniform dust-to-gas ratio, about 3. So it's very, very dense particle layer. And I've given it a small perturbation, and then let the system go. And you can see very quickly the system develops some kind of instability, and this instability entails very high dust concentrations here. So this is the streaming instability. It's actually a physical instability that happens in a dusty gas system, or a rotating dusty gas system, that can lead to very high dust-to-gas ratios, so high that it may eventually collapse under its own gravity. There's no gravity in this simulation, but if I did include it, then it's very likely that these high-density dust clumps would actually collapse into planetesimals. So that's great. It's very generic instability, but there's one catch, and that is, for example, this simulation, I've actually not included any background turbulence. So the gas is actually not doing much in this simulation, but the dust is undergoing instability. So there's no turbulence being modeled, no external turbulence being modeled in this simulation. So one question I asked now 3 years ago is what happens to the streaming instability when you start considering more realistic disk models, which may be turbulent. So this was a summer project in 2017. Those of you who were here in 2017 may remember this student, Han Chen, Chen Kai. Now he's a master's student at Cambridge, and he started looking at this problem of trying to answer, does the streaming instability work in a turbulent disk, in a realistic turbulent disk? And we already had results back in 2017, but took us a while to get this out. So 3 years later, 2 weeks ago, we finally published this result. So the moral of the story is you should keep pushing your students and keep bugging them until they publish, even if it takes 3 years after their summer project. So just don't give up. Okay, so what did we actually find? So this is a calculation, an analytic calculation of how fast does the streaming instability grow in a protoplanetary disk as a function of 2 parameters. One parameter is the grain size, so larger grains going upwards. 10 to the minus 1 is something like centimeters, depending on where you are in the disk. And across the diagram is the turbulence strength, so turbulent alpha, or viscous alpha. So what we found is that the instability is actually quite easily quenched by turbulence. So for example, for let's say centimeter-sized particles, you can sustain turbulence strength up to about 10 to the minus 2, which is sort of the nominal value in protoplanetary disks. Nowadays, we think protoplanetary disks are actually weakly turbulent. So alpha is more like 10 to the minus 3 or 10 to the minus 4. And what we can see from this diagram is that so this is the 10 to the minus 4. So we can read off from this diagram what particle sizes can undergo the streaming instability in a turbulent disk. This gap here is very interesting because this is a very special location in parameter space where the dust-to-gas ratio is exactly 1. And in the analytic theory, when you reach that special location, the growth is actually 0. But it's a sort of a singular location in the parameter space. So this is how the streaming instability behaves in a turbulent disk. for arbitrary particle sizes and turbulent strength. Now we're going to put this calculation. Was there a question?
And what is the color coding?
Oh, sorry. This is the growth rate in units of orbital frequency. Yeah, so this is dynamical timescale. So what we're going to do now is to apply this calculation to a physical model of a protoplanetary disk. So what Senkan calculated here is to plot the growth timescale now in years as a function of radius in a minimum mass solar nebula type model. And so that is the red curve here. The black curve is the drift timescale for particles, centimeter-sized particles in this case. And we've chosen a nominal value of the turbulent strength of 10⁻³ in a very dust-enriched disk. So in this case, for example, if the red line is above the black curve, then we don't care about it because in these regions the particles would be lost, they would drift towards the star before any growth can happen. So we only need to focus on this part of the diagram. So as you can see, beyond tens of AU, that's 100 AU, the instability can grow quickly compared to both the drift time scale of the system, of the particle, so the instability can grow before you lose the particles to the star. It's also shorter than the force of disk lifetime here. So this is kind of cool. But we also try to apply this to, some kind of observations, right? So we're trying to apply linear theory now to observations. So I'm sure everyone is now familiar with these dust rings around HL tau, and many ideas. There are many ideas in the literature trying to explain these. So we asked the question, could these be due to the streaming instability? Because the instability is actually axisymmetric. So instability naturally leads to rings and gaps. So what we did was we took the parameters for HL tau and we put it in our linear calculation and asked for growth time scales. So now this is the diagram, the growth time scale for the instability, that's Fuji radius, for a disk model that, we think is representative of HL tau. But many of the observers here can correct me on that. And what we found here is that yes, it is possible, it's consistent that these rings could be due to the streaming instability. Because here, this is the instability timescale, all less than 1 million years, which is the age of HL tau. They're all less than the drift timescale, so they can grow before you lose the particles. So it might have some contribution to the rings and gaps we see in HL tau. Now I wanted to give you a little preview. Well, I don't actually have results here, but so all of the analysis we've done so far has been based on one very key assumption in the technical derivation of in the technical analysis, which is we really focused on what's happening right at the disk midplane. So this is plotting the dust to gas ratio as a function of height away from the midplane of the disk. Now, all of my results, prior results, are based on looking at everything happening right here, right at the midplane. So I haven't really considered the disk structure. But in reality, of course, the disk has vertical structure, right? The dust to gas ratio should be highest in the middle of the disk and it declines away from the disk midplane. So now the analysis, one of the approximations I made before was to focus on the midplane. But what I'm now working on is looking at the problem more globally, trying to account for the global disk structure. I have some early results. If you're interested, you can come talk to me. But they're a little bit technical, but very interesting. Actually, I'm very excited about this ongoing study. Okay, anyway, I just wanted to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about my recent works. Planetesimal formation is, of course, a key step in planet formation generally. Dust settling is the first step, one of the first steps to planet formation. You need to form a very dense particle layer before planetesimals form. I talked about how that can happen even if you have turbulence. I talked about streaming instability, and I talked about how is the stream instability modified in the presence of turbulence. It turns out it's very sensitive to turbulence. It's very easily stabilized by turbulence. So it's not easy to form planetesimals by this instability if your disk is too turbulent. I think that's the main message I wanted to get across, at least from our analysis, our simple analysis. And ongoing work looking at disk stratification, so full 3D structure. So that's the end of my talk. But I also wanted to promote next week's talk, which is going to be a little bit different. So next week we're going to have a pizza lunch organized by TC, where we're going to the newcomer students to introduce themselves. So please remember to sign up for next week, and I'll see you next Monday. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, can you go back to the slides of Chen result? So yes, this one. So from this slide, I see that the streaming instability is probably only efficient at larger than 30 AU radius, right?
Yes.
Then the AMA survey of disks say most of the disks have radius smaller than 30 AU. So then basically this result say streaming instability is not the dominant mode of forming planetesimals.
Or you can interpret that as an upper limit to the turbulence strength. Mm-hmm. So if I lower the turbulence enough, then I could probably get it to go at the inner disk as well. So it turns out that this is really an important parameter.
The -3 is close to the lowest turbulence you can do.
Right. So if that's true, then it will be quite difficult. But I should say, all of these calculations are based on the alpha disk model.
Yeah.
So does the alpha disk model represent real turbulence? That's a question. So story's not finished.
Also, this is for centimeter static. So, but ALMA is seeing wavelengths, millimeters. I don't know, maybe. Also matters.
Yeah, I mean, centimeter size is already quite favorable.
Yeah.
Oh,
for the
really?
instability.
Really? I don't know.
Yeah, if we go to realistic particle sizes, millimeter, then you will see a blank page. Yeah. DC, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, our expertise, is cooling actually an important factor for the disk settlement? I mean, if you start with the disk with the initial conditions, but we add cooling for the disk, so it can dynamically cool without having all these effects.
Actually, it's the opposite. The reason, so I think you're referring to this particle stirring effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, for example, this instability actually relies on rapid cooling. It relies on the disk being close to isothermal, actually. If the disk doesn't cool very fast, then this instability actually does not happen. It's to do with the physics of this particular peculiar instability. Here.
Yeah, suppose the streaming instabilities work and particles grow. Can you keep them, those particles in the disk for millions of years to let them slightly grow? I find this not an organic core or good pebble accretion, so rock rather style.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the instability grows, if it happens, and it grows on a dynamical time scale. So it would give you planetesimals very quickly. And once you form planetesimals, they decouple from the gas, right? So that's probably okay. If you can get it going, but that's the key question. Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, in this framework of streaming instability, what is it that leads to the periodic gaps on the rings? So if you wanted to use this scenario to explain that.
Yeah, thanks. So when we do the analysis, we need to input a wavelength for the instability. And we can maximize the growth rate over all length scales. So there's a particular length scale that grows the fastest. And that should be the length scale you use to compare with observations. I didn't show it here, but we did actually look into comparing the length scales from the calculations and the length scales we see in the images, and they can be comparable. So I think it's, yeah.
So that would lead to a signal size for gap and width or rings, or is it something that has a profile that falls off the radius?
There's probably going to be a profile, but I need to check that because the analysis done here is all local. So we're really looking at one radius each time we do a calculation. So we have a length scale for at that radius. So we can piece together different radii. And then the profile probably comes from the background disk structure, I'm guessing. So yeah, there's probably some profile.
So this one is for weekly isothermal.
Yes.
So if you include a temperature gradient, it's an assumption.
Right, so there is a radial temperature gradient already here. You're referring to a vertical?
Vertical.
I do not know, actually. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think people have tried that yet. At least from the theory part, I don't think we've. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. The suppression of the instability is due to because the asymmetric mode, so it's due to the radial mixing mode. I just follow up this length scale. You have just answered the question from Patrick. And curious, the suppression of the instability is due to the radial mixing.
You mean the distance instability?
Or this instability or streaming instability.
So in this case, I found the simplest way to think about it is that if you have a large dust to gas ratio, then it becomes more difficult for the gas to lift up the dust particles because there's more inertia. So it's more difficult for the gas turbulent to stir up dust particles if there's a lot of dust in the system because of the weight of the dust. In the streaming instability case, it's because of particle diffusion. So the instability is trying to create dust concentrations. But if there's turbulence, then there's going to be particle diffusion. And that is going to try to diffuse away any particle concentration. And it turns out that it's very sensitive to that effect. Yeah, one quick question?
Do you have some isothermal temperature distribution in the vertical direction?
Vertically, it's isothermal.
If a system is fully turbulent, you got a isentropic assumption be better than isothermal assumption.
Sure. So yeah, I think in the inner disk, I think that's probably true. But in the outer disk, well, in the outer disk, let's say 100 AU or a few tens to 100 AU, there's actually illumination from the central star. So that actually tries to maintain the disk at a particular temperature profile. So the vertical isothermal approximation is probably not too bad in the outer disk, at least for protoplanetary disks because of stellar irradiation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
So,
Yeah.
first of all, what motivates you to change the dust to gas ratio in the initial condition? So, is there any?
Yeah, there is actually.
Change dust to gas ratio first of all.
Yeah. So it turns out from the people who study the streaming instability, so people from the numerical simulation that look at this problem, they really only find eventually the system will collapse into planetesimals, but only if the overall dust-to-gas ratio is large enough. So only if the dust-to-gas ratio is a few percent can the streaming instability eventually lead to planetesimal formation.
So there should be some mechanism to increase dust-to-gas ratio, maybe evaporating gas or something.
Yeah, so evaporating gas, or there's a radial evolution. For example, the dust drifts inwards and the gas moves out. Yeah, that's also possible. Or there are special structures in the gas, pressure bumps, to collect the dust particles. Okay, thank you for your attention. Let's finish it there.